It's the Wisco Home Goods Summer Clearance Event, and it's too hot to miss. Now through July 26th, buy any 2 10-ounce soy candles and get the third free. Stock up on your favorite scents while they last, but hurry, this deal is in-store only and exclusions apply. Shop local, breathe easy, feel good with Wisco Home Goods. Think of the excitement of being a kid on the first day of school. Now imagine what it would feel like if your family couldn't afford to send you with a backpack and school supplies. Help Goodman Community Center give every kid a great start to the school year by supporting their backpack and school supply drive. Visit goodmancenter.org/backpack drive to learn how you can buy supplies and drop them off, order online and ship to Goodman, or simply make a donation and let Goodman do the shopping. Every child matters and every gift helps. This is CityCast Madison. I'm Bianca Martin, and here's what Madison's talking about. Today, we're talking about some pretty important work happening in our community, the unearthing of some ugly local history with an opportunity to do something about it. People in our county, including the county government, are moving to address a discriminatory housing practice, racial housing covenants. What they are, how we got them, and what we can do about them, that's what we're talking about today. In a moment, I'm going to talk with local historian Rick Bernstein and then Dane County Executive Melissa Agard. But first, we're going to kick this episode off with a special guest. Producer Jade Isiri Ramos, welcome to the show.
Hi, Bianca.
So you brought this show idea to the team because of something in your personal life. Jade, what happened?
Yeah, so a couple months ago, my husband Alex got an email from the city of Monona, which is where we live, about an event to amend your property deed if there's a racial covenant on it. That email included a link to an interactive map, and when Alex put in our address, lo and behold, there was language that dictated that only white people can live in my house. And awkward, Bianca, I'm not white.
I know. Oh, I'm looking at the language right now. You shared it with me, and it says, quote, "Only members of the Caucasian race shall use or occupy any dwelling on said plat, excepting that this covenant shall not prevent occupancy by domestic servants of a different race employed by an owner or tenants." Yush. Yuck.
Not great, right? And it made me feel so heavy, just to sort of know that this was hanging over my house and over me. Like I said, this discriminatory language is not enforceable and it's actually illegal. But it was really uncomfortable living in a house that I own, knowing there's something on my deed that says I can't even occupy or use my home.
It is so heavy. And honestly, this is not the first time I've seen one of these covenants. I remember when my sister was living in Shorewood Hills, my sister was in a band and they had a bunch of people there. And one of them showed me this racial covenant that said no Negro is allowed to live on this property. And I remember, I think they made jokes about it because, like you said, awkward. It's kind of awkward. What do you do about it? But the fact is, it sat with me for a really long time because it's heavy and it made me very sad because I also stayed at this house and just this was exclusionary. It was really upsetting.
Yeah, I think there's something about almost feeling like the spirit of a house doesn't want you to be there. Maybe that sounds goofy, but when you're experiencing it, it's real, right? It's an impression that you feel.
Well, also trying to find home in America, that it's just, it goes deep because it's this, if this isn't our home, where's our home? It's dark. And I understand you filed paperwork to get this removed, right?
Okay, so technically, I didn't file paperwork to get it removed. I filed paperwork to discharge and release the discriminatory restrictions affecting my property, which means I added language on my deed to make the racial covenant void. And I did that last month at an event that the county held at the Alliant Energy Center. I sat down with a couple of very nice notaries who told Alex and I exactly where to sign, and I've got my photocopy right here. Proof. And, we went over and we marked our house off of a big paper map and we took a little photo. And truly, I felt lighter, like there was a weight lifted off of my shoulders.
Mm. I can't even imagine like buying a house. This is your big moment. And then to later find out what you have
Yeah,
got to be my house
my
says
house.
I'm not supposed to be here. I'm so happy for you, Jade, and just so glad that you brought this forward because I don't think this is a widely known issue. Like more people should know about it. And when you brought it forward, I just thought, oh, I'm so grateful something's being done. You heard the call and you took it. So appreciate you for so many reasons. And I'm glad that you had that weight lifted.
Thanks, Bianca.
We are going to dig in because this is a personal issue and I'm glad things are being done. We're going to hear from Dane County Executive Melissa Agard about the work the county has done to create that interactive map you mentioned, Jade, and make the process of removing racial covenants as easy as possible. But first, let's hear from Rick Bernstein, Executive Director of the Dane County Historical Society, about the history of this practice. Rick, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about racial covenants.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, so you are leading a very significant project, a traveling exhibit called Unjust Deeds, History of Racial Covenants in Dane County and Beyond, that is touring around Dane County libraries. Tell us, what is this exhibit?
Well, this exhibit grew out of a mapping project that the Dane County Planning Department was doing. They put on a map where they could find all the racial covenants in Dane County, of which they found a little over 4,000 homes were covered by racial covenants. And when I saw the map, it motivated me to do something more because I thought it was interesting that we're talking about these covenants, but we didn't always have the historical context to really understand how these covenants came about and how prolific they were and how much of an impact they had. So I work at the Dane County Historical Society, and I knew that there was an opportunity here for us to really get some of that context in a easily absorbable traveling exhibit. And so there are 14 retractable banners that cover the history of racial covenants from mid-19th century until the 1968, when they were actually made totally illegal by a national law called the Fair Housing Act.
And before we jump into the history, Rick, what is a racial covenant?
Racial covenant. It's really a very simple instrument where you can take a codicil, a sentence, and put it into a land deed. And it has the impact of zoning. It actually says you can no longer do this on this property. And there was a tradition of doing that starting with some of the earlier suburbs in the mid-19th century to prevent stills and other obnoxious things from happening to a neighboring lot. But it wasn't until 1910 and Edward Boughton in Baltimore where he actually put a codicil in there saying nobody who wasn't Caucasian could live in that suburb of Baltimore, Roland Park. And from there, it really proliferated mostly with high-end suburbs. But later, when the federal government got into the housing game in the 30s with the FDR administration, they made it mandatory. If you wanted any kind of federal financing or any kind of loan guarantee, they required a covenant. And it was always with the idea that they were protecting property values, that just by the mere fact of a Black person owning property, your property values would go down. But there was actually no hard and fast evidence of that. And even when FHA did their own survey, they found that that was not the case.
Right. So this was like this huge response around the Great Migration. So we know that lots of African Americans were moving from the South to the North for more opportunities, and there was a reaction to it. And this was one of those reactions because...
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the exhibit does talk about that. And so you're right. The cotton farms were having a blight, but there was an industrialization that was taking place in the North because of World War I in the teens. And so there was a large number of Blacks who left the South to trying to find better jobs and to flee the violence where they lived in the Deep South.
That's certainly how my family, the Black side of my family, moved up to Chicago from New Orleans, from the South. I know lots of people have those stories. You were talking about the nationwide practice of racial covenants got its birth in Baltimore, but it was this big boom in the 1920s and 30s in response to the Great Migration. Rick, can you help localize that history for us? Like, what was happening to housing and segregation in Dane County in the 20s and 30s? Like, how did these covenants happen and why?
Well, it's a story that we tried to tell on a national level, but it had certainly had its impact here in Madison. We mentioned how they were first used in Baltimore, but when it became an issue for the National Board of Realtors, they promulgated a template to all of their real estate agents or realtors, and they promoted the use of racial covenants. There also was a movement on a national level to promote neighborhood associations, and they became the police force that encouraged people to put racial covenants on their property and to also enforce them, so that if one of those covenants was transgressed, they would go to court to force people to renege on the sale. So I don't have as many local instances that happened, but I do know there was an oral history in the book Settling, where a realtor in the 40s sold a house to a Black couple, and she lost her realty license and she was fined. And so she never worked as a realtor again. I imagine that story could be told 100 times more locally and maybe nationally. So there were private interests that were working on this as well as national.
Yeah, and you said 4,000 of them are mapped. That's not insignificant.
No, it's not. But if you look at the map, there are very much like there are hotbeds, and Monona is certainly one of them. There were about 800 homes that had covenants in Monona. And if you look at the near west side, there's like a belt going north to south where there are lots of covenants. And after World War II, when they started doing larger developments, they could place a single covenant on a plat rather than just a single house lot. So where I live in Winnequa Terrace, my plat covers 106 homes, and it just took a single covenant. In 1951, which was after the court case said that they were no longer legal to enforce by the courts, but they still allowed it to be a private agreement. Had anyone taken it to court, they could have won, but it became kind of this nebulous area. Is it a legal, is it a non-legal document? So even as late as 1951, they were still placing covenants on properties.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, our producer Jade, I believe her house is in that situation as well. It was built in that interstitial, and I want to talk about the interstitial.
Okay.
But also mention, like you said, that band on the west side. So other
Right.
places that were hotspots, Maple Bluff, Shorewood Hills, Crestwood neighborhood. Those are some of those locations. But when you're talking about houses being built even after these were identified as being illegal, can you talk about that history?
The first major Supreme Court case was 1948, called Shelley versus Kramer. A homeowner in St. Louis, was originally from Mississippi, had a big family of several children, wanted a home of their own. And so they bought a house on Labadie Street in St. Louis. And it was a neighborhood association member who lived a few doors down that took them to court, saying that there's a covenant on the property, you can't sell it to a Black person. So it made it all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court kind of took a fine line to the issue and said that it was no longer enforceable by the courts, that it wasn't legal for a public entity to support this, but that private individuals could still have agreements between themselves. It was a little unclear just how to administer that. If a Black person took it to court, they were likely to win, but it would take someone a certain amount of money and time to actually take it to court.
Right. So still a hindrance.
Yeah, the private agreements were still in place.
And then there was the final act of making it illegal.
Then in 1968, they passed the Fair Housing Act under the Johnson administration, and that just made racial covenants flat out illegal. So they've fallen out of favor in 1948, but they didn't completely go away. But by the time it's 1968 came in, the problem is with zoning, it became kind of racially blind. It didn't actually state anything about race, but in many cases, the zoning was based on financial situation and in a way had its impacts in terms of keeping neighborhoods white or keeping them black.
Oh, interesting. Because you talked about those hot spots as being kind of wealthier areas.
And if you look at Monona, it's still very, very white. And if you look at many of the suburbs of Madison, they're still very, very white. And the areas where blacks were supposedly allowed to live in South Madison and along Park Street, it's still very concentrated in terms of black owners and neighbors and residents. So it hasn't changed a lot. The impact is still very much with us. And that kind of accounts for a very large gap between homeowners, white and black. And that racial wealth gap is still very, very prominent.
Mm-hmm. Talk about a very big nuance in our housing conversation. Rick, we're talking to you about the history, right? And I know we could have gotten to so much more, but do you as a historian think it's worth the time and effort to strike language that at this point is illegal and unenforceable?
I think it's good for people to be very clearly aware of the covenant on their property, to also just legally file a resolution that kind of shows where they're coming from, that they don't want to be complicit with the racial discrimination that preceded them in the ownership of the house. But I think it does need to take that next step and actually build a coalition, perhaps, of people who really want to do something about it. And it's not going to be easy. It's going to take work. It's going to take money. But hopefully you're building a base for some kind of future action.
We hear arguments about keeping certain things around so you can learn from it. Is this exhibit the answer to that?
Well, it's one tool that I think is having an impact. I think a lot more has to be done. I'm working with a library in McFarland that wants to do something more than just dealing with racial covenants. They want to understand what discrimination looked like in McFarland, even though there weren't a lot of covenants in that area. They don't want to just leave the impression, oh, that's something that happened in Madison, but it didn't happen in McFarland.
Because they know it happened informally.
Again, it's a very white community then and now, and there's probably a reason for that. It wasn't just happenstance. It wasn't just because black people didn't want to live there. It's because they were kept from living there. And so you might have to broaden your understanding. It wasn't through covenants, but there might have been other legal mechanisms or other actors in the drama of a history. But yeah, so I think it's one step among many, but I do think it has its impact. And hopefully people know a lot more about covenants than they did before.
Well, this history is just so important, and why people can, look around your neighborhood and look at the constitution of it. And there's a reason for it, as you said. There's a lot to be learned. So before we let you go, this Unjust Deeds exhibit was just at the Monona Public Library. I know that it's at Marshall now. You're on the move. You will be for the rest of the year. Can you give us like a brief description of where these events are going to be happening nearby us?
Yeah, it's scheduled for libraries between now and February of 26. It'll go to Mount Horeb Public Library in July. The Dane County Bookmobile has 3 different locations: Shorewood Hills, Cottage Grove, and Maple Bluff.
Those are close to us.
The closest might be Sequoia Library in October. It'll be there the full month of October. And at each of these libraries, I do a presentation. So one day out of the month, I'm scheduled to speak at all of them.
Mm-hmm. Well, Rick, we really appreciate your time. This entire exhibit can also be seen on the Dane County Historical Society website, danecountyhistory.org/racial-covenants. We'll throw that link into our show notes, and I hope folks get out to your presentations and appreciate the work that you're doing. It means a lot.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm so glad to talk to you.
On July 19th, experience a night of wonderful music under the stars. Join Madison Opera for Opera in the Park, a free concert in beautiful Garner Park. A Madison summer tradition, Opera in the Park draws thousands of people to enjoy a concert of excerpts from opera and Broadway. Opera in the Park 2025 takes place at 8 p.m. on Saturday, July 19th. The rain date is Sunday, July 20th. The concert features music by Mozart, Bizet, Puccini, Beethoven, and more, performed by Renee Richardson, Emily Tragle, Andrew Bidlack, Benjamin Taylor, the Madison Opera Chorus, and the Madison Symphony Orchestra, conducted by John DeMaine. The audience is always invited to conduct with their light sticks on a special number. So pack your picnic, gather your friends, and join Madison Opera in Garner Park on July 19th to celebrate the power of connection through music. Learn more at madisonopera.org.
Get lost in the acoustic brilliance of 3D audio that surrounds you. Feel the embrace of the massage seats that adapt to your every move. Experience the warmth of a vehicle that welcomes you as you approach. We could tell you what makes a Lincoln SUV so extraordinary, but don't take our word for it. Take it on a test drive at the Lincoln Summer Invitation, with exclusive offers on now, only at your local Lincoln retailer.
We just heard from Rick Bernstein, who gave us a historical perspective on racial covenants. And now we're thrilled to welcome Dane County Executive Melissa Agard on the pod to tell us how the county is working to identify and remove this discriminatory language in property deeds. Melissa, welcome back to CityCast Madison.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yes, so I understand that this issue hits close to home for you, as does for several of our team members here. Your house, too, had a racial covenant, and you recently filed to have that removed. How did you discover this, and what made you personally decide to take action?
I had the opportunity to sit down and talk with the planning department shortly after I took office as county executive. And they talked to me about the work that they've been doing, identifying where these racial covenants are in Dane County. And I was exceptionally curious about this because my time in the legislature, I worked on a piece of legislation, Wisconsin Act 210. And I was connecting that these are hand in glove for one another. That bill that went through the state legislature and was signed into law last session allows the county to create this program. But even before that program was created, thanks to the legislature, the county was ahead of the game, and they have identified nearly 4,000 homes in Dane County that have this language on their deeds. And they were showing me how it works. And I plugged my address in, and I'll tell you, I felt like my socks were knocked off when I realized that my little house on the north side of Madison has one of these racial covenants on it. And I was so excited that Dane County is providing a path for people like you and I to be able to file paperwork to decry this language on our deeds.
Yeah, and as context, we said, welcome back to the show. You were on the show last fall when you were running for Dane County Executive. So you mentioned that you were familiar with this issue in the state legislature and the county was working on it separately. But can you dive into the county's work just a little bit to give us a background on this effort and what that early work looked like? I'm very interested in this map that was created.
Yeah, so we have an amazing planning department here in Dane County, and we actually had an intern in the planning department through the Boys and Girls Club. And the staff within the planning department wanted to make sure that this project that the intern was going to work on in the summer was going to be really meaningful. And to me, it is really a true testament to how local government matters and the power of internships. So this young person through the Boys and Girls Club worked with our planning staff to identify this language that's on deeds. And they did it through OCR scanning process, not looking at every single deed by hand, but taking advantage of technology and being able to scan documents here within the county and create that database and then map it out. And now anyone can go and put their address in and see if you're affected by one of these racial covenants.
I adore that as a former Boys and Girls Club member and staff member. Go Boys and Girls Club. And I love that. I love this project for them. I don't know who the intern was, but I love this project for them. And, obviously the resulting effort here. You mentioned in 2024, there was the act that was signed into Wisconsin law that allowed property owner to release discriminatory restrictions. Can you tell us, how is the county making a way for homeowners to strike this language from their house deeds? What does that look like?
We were one of the first counties in Wisconsin to really move forward on this. So we have been working closely with the state government, the state DOA, to make sure that the forms and the processes.
The DOA?
Department of Administration, through the state. Alphabet soup in government is a true thing. So I appreciate you slowing me down and asking me for clarity there. And then we had to work with not just the planning department who mapped this out, but our Register of Deeds office, who, is the office within county government that would file these forms. We've had the opportunity to work with the Realtors Association, who actually provided an amount of money for waiving the fees for, I think, the first 100 or 200 people that come through and file to remove the restrictions off of their properties, and with our Office of Equity and Inclusion as well, to make sure that we're getting the message out. And we had an amazing event a number of weeks ago at the Alliant Energy Center with people that were there to talk about this process, the history of how it is that we have been here, and then also to help walk people through removing these covenants. When I last reached out to the planning department, it seemed as if we had about 50 properties in Dane County who took advantage of that public listening session to file the covenant removal, which is, I think, amazing.
It is very amazing. And I know that our producer, Jade, was one of the households that did take advantage of that. You mentioned the Realtors Association being helpful in offering funding for this. I do want to know, how much does it cost? And have they met their threshold? People thinking, can I get financial help on this?
Yeah, so the cost would be, if you just walked into the Register of Deeds office with the form yourself, $30. But I do believe that there continues to be some money in the pot. I tried right before we sat down to figure out how much would be there, but it's forever changing, right? Because you never know when another person is going to walk through the door. But removing barriers is important for me, and I think important for us here in the county. And having access to those funds has been, I know, instrumental for some of the people that walked in the room to be able to take access of that public event and be able to file the paperwork for their own homes. And I think here in our community, we hold each other to a high standard. And the act of remediating this language from your deed is healing. Also, at a time when government is so chaotic, allows us to really celebrate some good that is happening within government, especially right here in our local government.
When we're talking about the event that you had, are there going to be additional opportunities where the county holds a sort of fair or a place where people can come and get that done in a sort of a specific location?
We are excited about being able to show up in places and get this in front of as many people as possible. If people have an event, if they contact my office at county.executive@danecounty.gov, we'll see what it is that we can do to show up. Then I think if we can get into those communities, right, into the neighborhood associations, and be there to answer questions, to be able to provide the forms, that we as a community are stepping up in a way that matters to us, recognizing, educating one another, and recognizing that this is our history. This is the truth of our community, and we need to be honest about it. And we need to think about what message are we delivering to the future, and taking advantage of the state law change and the fact that Dane County is ahead is really important to me, to recognize the work that we can do as well as how it is that we got here. And then being able to take responsibility, being curious about this, and continuing in the work that we are doing to dismantle inequities and shine light on the fact that these records exist is important also. And, then there's the remediation, people who actually live in those homes. If you're curious and you find out you live in one of these homes, realizing what actions you can actually take. But there's a lot of room for these conversations and to learn about this history right here in Dane County for people that aren't living in these hotspots. And I think being able to lean in and to be curious and to ask these questions. And you never know when you're going to run across someone who has a restrictive deed that is not you. And you may be the best ambassador to provide people with the information that they can take action and they have a duty to take action.
I really appreciate that point, Melissa, that even if you don't have a restrictive or racially discriminatory language on your deed, you're still a part of this community where they exist. And my sister, she lived in a house that had the deed, and it was affecting to me. It's affecting to people in the community. And, we're talking about how important it is to take action in the present. I've been thinking a lot about history and the importance of history. We just saw the Wisconsin Supreme Court rule that an 1849 law does not qualify as a ban on consensual abortions. But that dormant law did halt abortion access in Wisconsin for more than a year after the overturn of federal protection. So thinking about the impact of a more than 100-year-old law can have on real Wisconsinites, is it implausible that this language on house deeds from 50 or 60 years ago could be possibly used against potential homeowners in the future? How much is removing this language practical versus symbolic?
Yeah. So, we don't know how it is things will be used against us in the future. And we have the power right now to take action and discharge and release this language on our deeds. This restrictive language currently is not legally enforceable. But as you mentioned, we are living in kind of an upside down time. And there are points in time where we feel like we are going in a time machine going backwards. And if there's something that we can do right now to prevent that from happening right here in Dane County and be leaders, not only in Wisconsin, but for our nation, to think about how other communities can do this work and provide paths forward, it is not overly cumbersome, and it does make a difference. And I think that ultimately, while it's not going to remove the text from your deed, that text will still be there. It is going to denounce the record. And we know that they are unenforceable now, but like you said, who knows what is coming up in the future? So why wouldn't we continue fighting like hell to do everything that we can for our friends and neighbors and for our kids into the future?
And so where can people find more information on how to take action and follow, Dane County's resources on this matter?
You can visit DaneCountyPlanning.com. That's no spaces. It's the words Dane County Planning altogether.com to learn more about the ability to file your paperwork and where it is that we have these racial covenants. And you can also learn more about what our amazing planning department does if you visit that website.
Dane County Executive Melissa Agard, thank you so much for your time and for explaining the work that the county is doing to make Madison and Dane County a less discriminatory place. It means a lot.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be able to talk about the good work that the county does and to spend some time with some powerful community leaders and changers.
That's Melissa Agard, Dane County Executive. Earlier, we also heard from Rick Bernstein, Executive Director of the Dane County Historical Society, and our very own producer, Jade Isiri Ramos. For more information about the Unjust Deeds exhibit and to see if your house deed includes a racial discriminatory covenant and what you can do about it, head to our show notes for a link. That's all for today, here on CityCast Madison. I'm Bianca Martin, your host. If you enjoyed the show, why not share this episode with literally anyone who owns a house in our county? Anyone and everyone. All right, we'll be back tomorrow morning with more stories from around the city. Until next time, take good care and take care of each other.